afternoon and welcome to CEC Guru lecture. In today's lecture, we are continuing with the series on Indian sociological tradition, and in this lecture, we are going to discuss on a book written by Irawati Karve, Kinship Organization in India. This is one of the classical texts written by Irawati Karve as a feminist anthropologist and helps us to understand the dimension of kinship, caste and family. So let us try to understand how she, as a young feminist anthropology, helps us in understanding kinship in India. So Karve was a stalwart of Indian sociology when it had just been institutionalized in the country. Making her mark in a male-dominated discipline was not an easy task, but Karve's powers in her subject helped her find the footing. So it was no doubt fighting her way out in a discipline which was dominated by men and an area which was not kind of much researched in India. Much of the anthropological understanding of kinship in the 19th century was coming from British anthropologists, and therefore it becomes very important for Irawati Karve to do her research on kinship. She pioneered the use of Indology for the study of Indian society. Her work on kinship have been considered as an attempt to institutionalize Indian sociology and create a multidisciplinary corpus of knowledge. She was the first female anthropologist of India. So the best understanding how we kind of map the work that she has done is to understand her Karve's methodology derived from her book Kinship Organization in India. Karve had written the first draft of the book during her stay in England in 1951-52 at the invitation of the School of Oriental and African Studies of the University of London, where she had the opportunity to discuss many points with Louis Hammondorff and Louis Domo. On her return, she thoroughly revised the first draft to bring in the form of the book. So the best understanding of her methodology, Indological combined with anthropology and field work, is illustrated in the work on Kinship Organization in India. The research for this book started in 1938 and the book was published in 1953. So we see the long period that she took in terms of conceptualizing the content of the book and finally publishing it. If we look into the book, we see that she mentions in the introduction of her book that to understand India, to have a complete holistic understanding of any cultural phenomena in India, it is important to look at three things: the configuration of linguistic region, the institution of caste and family organization. So all the three together has to be researched and understood if we were to have an understanding of India as a society. Each of these factors bound up with two or three and gave meaning to Indian culture. So we begin with the study of kinship. Now the study of kinship is based on personal inquiry supplemented by her reading in Sanskrit, Pali, Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi and Maithili. So she had a grasp of all these regional language, which helped her to combine what is evident in the text and literature with empirical fieldwork. Now we look into this kinship map of India, that is in her book she is creating a map where she is kind of dividing the entire country into linguistic zone, and each linguistic zone has been identified with a particular kinship pattern. So the first is the Indo-European or Sanskritic linguistic zone. So the people of this area are more or less speaking Sanskrit and Indo-European language. This is the northern zone. The second is the Dravidian kinship in southern zone. The third is a central zone of mixed pattern. So in the central zone we find the elements of both north and south, and they this not fixed, it could be kind of lot of variance from one part to the other. And the fourth map is the Mundari kinship, which is found more in the eastern zone. Now let us understand each of these zones and more focus on understanding the kinship system or the feature of kinship. So, the northern zone consists of areas speaking Punjabi, Hindi, Sindhi, Assami, Bihari, Bengali and Nepali. So, first he divides the country into these linguistic zones and then tries to identify the common features or characteristics of kinship. In the northern zone, we see there is the practice of clan exogamy and caste endogamy. Now, clan exogamy is to marry outside your clan. So, it is a larger group, you marry outside the clan, but when it comes to a caste, which is again a kind of a ritual stratification of Indian society, the practice is to marry within your own caste, and therefore, when we have these rules of marriage, there are also taboos related to sexual relation between primary relations. So, you have this incest avoidance. Certain category of relatives with whom we kind of share a blood relation are kind of excluded from sexual relation, and there is the taboo of incest avoidance. The second feature of northern zone is that there is a distinction between family of birth and the marriage. So, they are kind of completely different, and this is more or less about women having two family, the family of orientation and the family of procreation. So, in North India, a woman kind of belongs to two family, and therefore, the entire kinship structure is based on the place to which this woman belongs. So, kinship relations would be more informal in the family of birth, whereas in her married place where she is married, or the family she is married, the kinship rules and taboos become more strict and stringent. So, kinship rule or sasan implies that one could not marry his, her patri family. Now, since northern zone is dominated by patrilineal patriarchal society, the rule is that it is to avoid marrying any member who is related to the patri fam. So, the northern India, you have the four gotra rule, whereas there is an avoidance of marrying anybody related to the father, grandfather, mother and grandmother, and also you have to kind of ensure that there is a clan exogamy. Now, the rule of four gotra, Brahmins and other upper caste practice the avoidance of father, mother, grandmother and maternal grandmother's relatives for marriage relations. So, these are all excluded. So, you have this whole idea of prescriptive marriage rule in North India. The partner is prescribed by the norms of the rules of the society. The Northern India does not allow any cross cousin. Now, when we look into the concept of cross cousin, it implies children of opposite sex sibling. So, the father and the father's brother's children would be parallel. But if we look into father and father's sister, they are from two opposite sex sibling, their children are cross cousin. Now, when we go into the southern zone, we will see that there we have the practice of cross cousin. North India completely prohibited. Kinship in North India is also kind of other rules which are kind of considered as hypergamy, and the idea is to give daughters in marriage to a caste which is higher. So, hypogamy is not practiced. You cannot, women from an upper caste cannot marry a man from a lower caste. It is kind of prohibited. So, it is not kind of say, but then there is lot of variation, but this is kind of a certain common features that Irawati has attributed to the northern zone. The central zone, if we look into, includes Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Orissa, Gujarat and Chhattisgarh. Now, central zone is a mixed kinship pattern. Here we will find elements of both northern zone and southern zone. So, cross marriage was not allowed like the northern zone, but the rule of two gotra was followed by the Rajasthani, and in some of the caste, village exogamy is followed, as the exogamous clans were stratified into hypergamous clan and caste. Four gotra rule were practiced by the Banyas and the hypergamous clans like the Rajput. So, there is a lot of variation in the central zone. Cross cousin marriage are prevalent which are not witnessed in northern zone. Cross cousins kind of marriages would be very common to the southern zone. So, you have the certain element which is coming in from north and others coming in from south. In the central zone, many castes are divided into exogamous clan, and in some castes, exogamous clans are raised in a hypergamous hierarchy. However, none of these features are found all over the zone. In Rajasthan, for example, the Jat follow the two Gotra exogamy along with village exogamy, and the Banyas practice the four Gotra rule. So, as I already said, there is a lot of variation. The third is the southern zone. Now, the southern zone would include areas like Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Now, this southern zone has a kind of more matrilineal, that is this kind of tracing your descent through the female line, and also patrilineal, patrilocal. So, it is a kind of mixed kind of kinship pattern that is there in southern zone. So, those who are matrilineal, matrilocal would follow the cross cousin rule. So, the southern zone, and which is also known as the Dravidian kinship, is kind of often contrasted with the northern zone, and they are kind of considered as almost opposed to each other. So, while the northern zone kind of has kind of complete restriction, no prohibition to cross cousin, in southern zone it is practice. So, if we look into the north, the people the rule is kind of prescribed. You prescribe who is your marriage partner. Whereas in the southern zone, it is a preferential marriage. You prefer to marry your cross cousin, that could be your father's sister's elder daughter, or it could be the mother's brother's daughter, which are kind of preferred for marriage. So, the main thrust in southern zone is kind of having preferential marriage is to maintain unity and solidarity of the clan and uphold of the principle of return. So, here the reciprocity works. So, the idea of reciprocity which comes in from Levi-Strauss alliance approach is that a woman is given in exchange of another woman, and it is most of the time the women is kind of within the same clan or lineage. Marriages are used to strengthen kin relationship with one another. So, in South India, there are two set of a line with guide people or descent with whom one can marry, and second with one who you cannot marry. So, the importance is given to bilateral link and little to territorial exogamy, which is again kind of coming into the comparison between north and south. North India, the women has kind to differentiate between her consanguine, that is the blood relative, and the affinal, that is her relations through marriage. In South India, we did not see the contrasting role between the two that the women would. So, in terms of trying to understand, it would be comparatively more gender egalitarian than in the northern zone. So, the fourth is the eastern zone. Now, eastern zone, Irawati Karve does not specify the exact border, and it was kind of more limited to the understanding of eastern zone. Much of the emphasis is to understand kinship pattern in north and contrast it with the Dravidian kinship of the south. Now, in the eastern zone, northern language are prominent as well as other languages like Mokhama, Mundari. Communities found here are Khem, Mon and Chain. It would be more of the population of the tribe which we find in the eastern zone. People with Mundari linguistic backgrounds have a patrilocal and patrilineal system. Now, again the eastern zone would be having certain features of North India and certain of the South India. And since it is majority of the Mundari, which is again a tribal group, it would be to do about the cross cousin marriage. So, the Ho and the Santhal practice cross cousin marriage, but only the time till the father's sister or the mother's brother is alive. So, there is a condition put here which is again different from southern zone. Marriage with elder daughter is not allowed. Now, we see the variance in kinship in eastern zone. Cross cousin marriage is rare. For example, Bondo people do not follow cross cousin marriage. In Assam, Khasis speak the Monkhwa language and they follow a matrilineal system like the Nair, but they are not completely similar. In Nair case, matrilineal joint family exists and husbands is kind of a visiting husband. So Nair is a matrilineal society with the practice of visiting husband. So here, like unlike the north where we have the women who is kind of dislocated and she belongs to two houses, in a matrilineal society where Nair is kind of considered as an anthropological model, you have the men who do not have a fixed or a permanent residence. They are kind of shifting between the mother and residence and the wife's residence. Khasis have a joint family with a common worship place and graveyard, but the husband wife live in small house of their own. So, if we look into all the four kinship linguistic mapping that Irawati Karve has done, we see there is an element of flexibility. At the same time, there is also the element of rigidity, and they exist side by side. And accordingly, the norms related to the kinship are also rigid and flexible. So, these rigidity and flexibility is kind of a part or reflected when we look into the contemporary society, we look into divorce, widow remarriage, incest taboos, caste endogamy, clan exogamy, rules of avoidance that we cannot have sexual relation, family structure, systems of lineage and residence. So, these are some of the areas where we will see the variation. Kinship continues, but whether we are kind of different or not, what is very important is to again negate the idea that kinship is no longer relevant or kinship is something which was found only in the primitive society. In contemporary societies, kinship continues to be the basic principle of social organization and mobilization on one hand, and division and discussion on the other. So, it is a complex phenomena and its role can be sensed even in modern organization. When we talk about migration, mobility, education system, they kind of tend to weaken the kinship systems and rules of clan organization because the members are kind of, they don't live together. It is not a territorially compact group. Most of the clan or descent groups are dispersed, but yet it kind of retains its importance as a principle of organization. So, when we look into the way in which Irawati Karve has tried to understand the kinship map, it is important to understand the configuration of linguistic region. See, in her book she says that a language area, a linguistic region implies an area with a common language. So, a number of groups would be speaking a dialect which would be more or less similar. For example, zone 1 and 2, that is northern and southern zone, the central zone, are speaking Sanskrit or Indo-European language, whereas in the southern zone, or that is the third zone, they are speaking Dravidian language, and the fourth, which is the eastern zone, they are kind of combination of Austric or Mundari language. Now, each of these language areas are further divided into linguistic region, and in each of such region, one language and its dialects are spoken. Now, the common language makes communication easy, sets the limit of marital connections, and the confines of kinship mostly within the language region. So, the kinship organization follows linguistic pattern, but in some aspect language and kinship pattern do not go hand in hand. So, though Maharashtra region belongs to the area of Sanskritic language, but its kinship organization is to a large extent model on that of Dravidian South. So, there is lot of, as already discussed, that there could be lot of variation, and these are kind of only model or ideal type which help us to kind of understand some of the features of kinship system, but they are not kind of fixed rules. There could be a lot of deviation. So, besides kinship, Irawati Karve also studied the caste system. Now, Karve work addresses two main themes. One is the origin of caste, and the second, the unit of analysis and differentiated, and this is kind of challenging G.S. Ghurye, who was a supervisor, and G.S. Ghurye has also done extensive work, and his book Caste and Race is kind of a must read if we were to understand caste system. So, what are the difference between Karve and Gurre? Number one, according to Irawati Karve, the caste in India is a Brahminical product of Indo-Aryan culture and it spreads through diffusion. And the second understanding of Karve is that the smallest endogamous unit or jati was spread through from the process of fission. Now, fission and fusions are concepts discussed by Evans Pritchard in the study of newer society. Fission means there is a split in the lineage, another subgroup is formed, and fusion is when two sublineages comes together to form a larger group. So, here is saying that the smallest endogamous unit would be formed through the process of fission, and this is specifically contemporary problems of occupational diversification and migration. So, we kind of also try to understand that why there is a change in the composition of family, or why the caste kind of does not so strictly regulate the occupational area. So, these are the process which brings about a change in the caste system. So, according to Irawati Karve, a caste is with very few exception an endogamous group and confined to one linguistic region. So, endogamous because the marriage is within the group and it is kind of a territorially compact group. Now, when we look into caste, it is also important to understand the relationship between caste and kinship. Irawati Karve claimed that kinship organization cannot be understood until and unless we have a complete understanding of the caste system. Endogamy and distribution over a definite area make caste members related to one another by ties of blood or by marriage. Therefore, caste can be defined as an extended kin group. So, because what is kinship? Kinship is the relationship between two members. Now, how are we establishing a relationship? We are going by caste rule. So, if we are saying that marriage is endogamous, that means that the kinship structure would follow that members of the same caste are related to each other. Karve observed that kinship organization is influenced and strengthened by the caste system, and both this conform to certain patterns found in different linguistic area. The third institution that he studies is family organization. So, the family is again kind of very important to understand if we were to understand kinship, and much of the debate on family is centered around joint family and the changes that is happening within the joint family to a nuclear family. Now, Irawati kind of helps us to why he studies family is because it helps to understand kinship rules and regulation. It is in the family that these rules and regulations are kind of applied, or they are kind of taught through the process of socialization. So, according to Karve, a joint family is a group of people who generally live under one roof, who eat food cooked in one kitchen, who hold property in common, participate in common family worship, and are related to one another as some particular types of kindred. Now, this is a functional definition of kinship, residing in one roof, eating from one kitchen, with kind of large scale changes that has happened due to globalization, urbanization. We see that the composition has changed, but the functional element still continues. So, two members of a family may be residing in two different houses, but if there is a ritual or if there is a kind of an occasion, the family joins together. So, the composition of joint family according to Karve was 3 or 4 generations of males related to male ego. But there is another way of understanding the debate on joint family to shift to elementary family, where we have already discussed in the series on the kinship, sociology of kinship, where A.M. Shah would kind of question this evolutionary transition. But for understanding Irawati's work on caste, kinship and family, it is important to read Karve's own work, which is the Kinship Map of India, that is published as a chapter in Patricia O'Broy's edited book, Family, Kinship and Marriage in India. India. We can also read Kinship Organization in India for reference. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.